Were medieval people superstitious about animals? Yes, absolutely. It's hard to overstate how deeply they believed animals were tied to the supernatural. But to understand why, you have to understand their world. It was nothing like ours. Imagine a life without electric light. When the sun went down, the world was plunged into a profound darkness, broken only by a candle or a fire. The forests that covered much of Europe weren't parks with hiking trails. They were vast, dark, and dangerous places. Wolves and bears were a real threat, not just creatures in a zoo. A trip to the next village could be a perilous journey. People lived their lives by the seasons. Their survival depended entirely on the harvest. A dry summer or a wet autumn could mean starvation. Sickness was a constant presence, and its causes were a mystery. A simple infection could kill you. The world felt unpredictable and often hostile. In a world like that, you look for signs, you look for meaning in everything, you try to find some sense of order or control in the chaos. And the church provided a powerful framework for this. The world was a stage for a constant battle between God and the devil. Every event, big or small, was a sign of this spiritual war. A good harvest was a blessing from God. A plague was a punishment for sin. Animals were right in the middle of this worldview. They weren't just biological organisms moving on instinct, they were actors in this divine drama. They were symbols, messengers, and omens. God could use an animal to send a message of hope. The devil could use an animal to tempt you or bring you harm. This wasn't just a quaint folk belief. It was taught by the church and written about by scholars. The universe was seen as a perfectly ordered system, the great chain of being, with God at the top, then angels, then humans, then animals, plants, and rocks. Every creature had its place and its purpose, assigned by God. And that purpose was often to teach humanity a lesson. The loyalty of a dog was a lesson in faithfulness. The cunning of a fox was a warning against deceit. So when a medieval peasant saw a raven, he didn't just see a black bird, he saw a potential omen of death. When he saw a lamb, he didn't just see a young sheep. He saw a symbol of Christ's innocence. The natural world was a book written by God, and animals were the words. People believed they just needed to learn how to read them. Their knowledge of the animal kingdom was also very different. For the animals they lived with, everyday cows, pigs, dogs, chickens, they had a practical, unsentimental understanding. They knew their habits and their uses. But for wild animals, especially those from faraway lands, their knowledge was a mix of fact, hearsay, and pure fantasy. There was no clear line between a real animal like an elephant and a mythical one like a unicorn. Both were described in books with the same level of authority. So the superstition wasn't born from ignorance, not exactly. It was born from a different way of seeing the world. A world where the spiritual and the physical were completely intertwined. A world where survival depended on reading the signs, and animals were the clearest, most common signs they had. They were a constant presence, sharing the fields, the forests, and even the homes of medieval people. It was only natural that they became central figures in the struggle to understand life, death, and the will of God. In the medieval mind, animals were not morally neutral. They were assigned roles almost like characters in a play. Some were seen as virtuous creatures of God who embodied good qualities. Others were seen as malevolent, agents of the devil sent to cause trouble. This wasn't just a matter of which animals were useful and which were dangerous, though that was part of it. It was about their symbolic meaning. Let's start with the good. The dog was almost universally loved. Its most praised quality was loyalty. In a world of shifting allegiances and betrayals, a dog's unwavering faithfulness to its master was seen as a profound moral lesson. The very word for a faithful dog, fido, comes from the Latin word fidelis, meaning faithful. Dogs were seen as protectors of the home, guardians of the flock, and loyal companions in the hunt. They appear in paintings at the feet of nobles and ladies, symbolizing marital fidelity. They were a clear example of a creature living out its God-given purpose. The horse was another noble animal. It was a symbol of status, power, and chivalry. A knight was nothing without his war horse. Horses were expensive, strong, and intelligent. They carried men into battle and helped them work the land. Their connection to the nobility gave them an aura of virtue. They represented strength in the service of a righteous cause. Then there were animals with direct religious symbolism. The lamb was the most powerful of these. It was the ultimate symbol of innocence, sacrifice, and of Christ himself, the Lamb of God. The dove, too, was a holy creature, representing the Holy Spirit, peace and purity. Seeing a dove was always a good sign. Even the humble donkey gained respect because it carried Mary to Bethlehem and Jesus into Jerusalem. But for every creature of God, there seemed to be a creature of the devil, and the wolf was a prime candidate for the role of villain. His wolves were a real and present danger. They killed livestock, a devastating loss for a peasant family. They were even known to attack and kill people, especially children, so it was easy to see them as instruments of evil. They represented savagery, greed, and the forces of chaos that threatened the ordered Christian world. The priest in the pulpit might speak of the devil as a wolf preying on the flock of Christ, and his congregation would know exactly what he meant. They had seen it with their own eyes. The snake, of course, was tainted from the very beginning. It was the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the creature that tempted Eve and brought about the fall of man. It was directly associated with Satan. Its slithering, silent movement and venomous bite only added to its sinister reputation. It represented deceit, temptation, and pure evil. Finding a snake in your home was a terrifying omen. And then there was the cat. Today we see cats as beloved pets, but in much of the Middle Ages they had a deeply sinister reputation. Their nature made people suspicious. They are independent and aloof, not fawning and obedient like a dog. They are nocturnal, moving silently through the darkness, their eyes glowing in the firelight. This association with the night connected them to witchcraft and pagan rituals. It was widely believed that witches could transform into black cats. A stray cat that hung around your door might not be a lost pet, but a witch's familiar, an evil spirit in animal form sent to spy on you or curse you. This suspicion had terrible consequences, especially during periods of witch hunts, when countless cats were killed. Other animals walked a finer line. The fox was not seen as purely evil, but as a trickster. It was clever, cunning, and deceitful, a symbol of heresy and trickery. Renard the Fox was a popular character in medieval stories, always outsmarting the more powerful but less intelligent animals. The pig was both valued and reviled. It was essential for food, a walking larder for the poor. But it was also seen as dirty, gluttonous, and symbolic of base desires. This division of the animal kingdom into good and evil wasn't a perfect system. A dog could go rabid and become a terrifying monster. A cat was still useful for catching mice. But the general framework was there. Animals were walking moral lessons. Their behavior, their appearance, and their role in the Bible all contributed to their reputation. They helped people make sense of the world, dividing it into forces of light and forces of darkness, of order and chaos. And you always had to be watchful for which kind had just crossed your path. Beyond seeing animals as generally good or evil, medieval people believed their specific actions were messages. An animal appearing at a certain time or behaving in a strange way was an omen. It was a sign from the supernatural world, a glimpse into the future, a warning of danger, or a promise of good fortune. This was a very practical kind of superstition woven into the fabric of daily life. Travel was a big part of this. A journey from one town to another was uncertain. Before you set out, you would watch for signs. The flight of birds was one of the most common things to observe. The direction they flew, their numbers, their calls, all of it could be interpreted. An eagle or a falcon flying on your right might be a sign of a successful journey. A flock of crows or ravens flying on your left was a very bad sign indeed. It might be enough to make you postpone your trip. The hare was another animal surrounded by omens. A hare was seen as a creature of witchcraft and bad luck. It was believed that witches could transform themselves into hares to cause mischief. So, for a hare to cross your path, especially at the start of a journey, was a terrible omen. It meant your journey was doomed to fail, or that you might meet with an accident. Some people would turn back immediately. The timing of these encounters was crucial. Seeing an animal first thing in the morning was especially significant. For example, meeting a pig in the morning was often considered good luck, but meeting a cat could be a bad sign for the day ahead. These beliefs varied from region to region, but the underlying principle was the same: the world was sending you signals, and animals were the messengers. These omens weren't just for travel, they applied to all aspects of life. The sound of a cuckoo was a famous example. People believed that the number of times you heard a cuckoo call in the spring would tell you how many years you had left to live, or how many years it would be until you married. An owl hooting from the roof of a house or from a nearby tree was a dire portent. The owl was a bird of the night, a creature of darkness, and its call was often thought to foretell a death in the family. But not all omens were bad. Some animals were signs of good things to come. A cricket on the hearth was a symbol of domestic happiness and good luck. And its cheerful chirping was a comforting sound in the home, and killing one was thought to bring bad fortune. Spiders, too, were often seen as lucky. A small spider, known as a money spider, was a sign that you were about to receive money. If one landed on your clothes, you were not to brush it off. Even insects were part of this system. Bees were held in high regard. They were seen as industrious, organized, and pure. Their wax was used to make church candles, giving them a holy association. It was a common belief that you had to tell the bees about important family events like a birth or a death. If you failed to tell the bees, they might leave their hive or stop producing honey. This shows how deeply people felt connected to the creatures they lived alongside. They weren't just livestock, they were part of the household, sensitive to the human drama unfolding around them. This practice of reading signs and animal behavior was a way of coping with uncertainty. Life was fragile. The future was unknown. Believing that you could get a hint of what was to come, a warning to turn back, or a sign to proceed with confidence gave people a small sense of control. It was a folk science, an attempt to find patterns and meaning in the random events of the natural world. It wasn't about defying God. Many believed these signs were part of God's way of communicating with his creation. Whether it was a bird's flight or a cricket song, the world was speaking. The wise person listened. The medieval understanding of the animal world had a very blurry edge. At the center were the familiar animals of the farm and forest. But on the fringes, the line between zoology and mythology completely disappeared. For medieval people, monsters were not just creatures of fantasy. They were believed to be real, living in distant, unexplored parts of the world. A major source for these beliefs was a type of book called a bestiary. Bestiaries were incredibly popular in the Middle Ages. They were illustrated catalogs of animals, both real and imaginary, but their purpose was not scientific accuracy. The purpose was moral and religious instruction. Each animal, whether a lion or a unicorn, was described not by its biology but by its symbolic meaning. The story of the animal was a lesson, an allegory for some aspect of Christian faith. The unicorn is the perfect example. According to the bestiaries, the unicorn was a fierce, wild horse-like creature with a single magical horn. It was so powerful that no hunter could capture it. However, it could be tamed by a virgin. If a pure maiden sat in the forest, the unicorn would come and lay its head in her lap, becoming gentle and falling asleep. The hunters could then capture or kill it. This story was not just a strange tale, it was an allegory for Christ. The unicorn represented Jesus, who was unconquerable by the forces of evil. The virgin represented the Virgin Mary. The unicorn, laying its head in her lap, symbolized the incarnation, Christ becoming human through Mary. The hunters were the people who crucified him, so the unicorn was real and its story was a lesson about salvation. As dragons were another creature that was considered absolutely real. They were described in the Bible, the Leviathan, and the stories of saints like St. George and in tales from across the known world. Dragons were the ultimate symbol of Satan. They were serpentine, breathed fire, and hoarded treasure. They represented greed, chaos, and paganism. To slay a dragon was to defeat evil and bring Christian order to the world. People didn't question their existence, they just believed they lived in remote caves, mountains, or deep within the earth. Finding a large fossilized bone would only confirm this belief. What else could it be but the bone of a dragon? The griffin was another popular creature. It had the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. This combination was highly symbolic. The lion was the king of beasts, ruling the earth. The eagle was the king of birds, ruling the sky. The griffin, combining both, was a symbol of Jesus' dual nature, his earthly human side, the lion, and his divine heavenly side, the eagle. They were said to be fierce guardians of treasure and were powerful and noble creatures. These beliefs were fueled by a lack of information. The world outside of one's immediate region was a place of mystery. Travelers would return from Africa or Asia with wild tales. They might see a rhinoceros and describe it as a fierce one-horned beast, a story that easily morphed into a unicorn sighting. A crocodile could become the basis for a dragon. A whale, a massive and terrifying creature to a small wooden ship, could be described as a sea monster so large it could be mistaken for an island, like the legendary Aspidoshalon, which would trick sailors into landing on its back before diving to the depths. There was no reason to doubt these stories. They were written down in respected books, sometimes based on the works of ancient writers like Pliny the Elder. They were illustrated in beautiful manuscripts by monks. The world was a wondrous and terrifying place created by God, so why shouldn't it contain such creatures? A griffin was no more strange, in principle, than a giraffe or an elephant to someone who had never seen one. So for the medieval person, the world was populated by a much wider cast of characters than we recognize today. The forest might contain wolves, but it might also hide a unicorn. The distant mountains were home not just to goats, but to dragons. The sea teemed with monstrous krakens and sea serpents. This belief wasn't just for children. It was a serious part of their cosmology. These monsters served a purpose. They represented the unknown, the dangers that lay beyond the safety of Christendom, and the ever-present forces of evil that had to be fought. They made the world more dangerous, but also more wondrous and full of meaning. These beliefs about animals were not just idle fancies or charming folktales. They had a real and powerful impact on people's daily lives. They shaped behavior, influenced justice, and provided a framework for understanding the world. Living with these beliefs meant living in a world where the supernatural was a constant and active force. The connection between animals and witchcraft had the most brutal consequences. The belief that witches kept familiars, demons in the form of animals like cats, toads, or dogs, was a core part of the witch trials that began in the later Middle Ages and intensified afterward. An old woman who lived alone and fed stray cats could easily fall under suspicion. The cats were not seen as pets, but as evidence of a pact with the devil. During interrogations, accused witches were often pressured to confess to having a familiar. The animal itself could become a target. The mass killing of cats, especially black ones, stemmed directly from this superstition. Ironically, this may have worsened the Black Death as fewer cats met more rats to carry the plague-infested fleas. Superstitions also played a huge role in folk medicine and protection. Parts of certain animals were believed to have magical or medicinal properties. A wolf's tooth might be worn as an amulet to ward off fear or protect against other wolves. A rabbit's foot was carried for good luck. Certain animal fats or organs were used in potions and salves, not just for their physical properties, but for their symbolic ones. To cure cowardice, one might be told to eat the heart of a lion. To improve eyesight, one might use a remedy involving the eyes of an eagle. This was a form of sympathetic magic, like effects like. These beliefs also dictated everyday actions. A farmer might mutter a prayer or make the sign of the cross if a raven flew over his field, fearing it was an omen of a bad harvest. A woman might refuse to let a black cat enter her house. Someone hearing an owl hoot at night might stay awake, praying for the protection of their family. These were small rituals, but they provided a sense of agency. You couldn't stop a plague or a famine, but you could take small steps to ward off bad luck or align yourself with the forces of good. Religion and superstition were completely blended. The church might condemn some pagan-seeming beliefs, but it also reinforced the idea that the world was full of divine and demonic signs. Stories of the saints were filled with miraculous encounters with animals. Saint Francis of Assisi was said to have preached to the birds and tamed a wolf. Other saints were saved by lions or guided by stags. These stories confirmed that animals were part of God's plan and could interact with the human world in supernatural ways. The line between a miracle, a saint, taming a wolf, and witchcraft, a witch commanding a wolf, was a matter of theological interpretation. For the average person, it just confirmed that animals were not ordinary. So why did these beliefs have such a powerful hold? Because they served a purpose. They helped explain a world that was often inexplicable. Why did a child suddenly die of a fever? Perhaps a witch sent her toad familiar to curse the house. Why did one farmer's crops fail while his neighbors thrived? It could be a matter of luck, of omens seen or ignored. These beliefs provided answers, even if they were not scientific ones. They gave a name to fears and provided a course of action, whether it was a prayer, an amulet, or an accusation. And the echoes of this worldview are still with us. Many people today, even if they don't truly believe it, might feel a slight unease if a black cat crosses their path. The superstition of 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy when seeing magpies is still known. We still use phrases like a wolf in sheep's clothing or call a sly person a fox. These are the faint remnants of a time when the world was seen as enchanted, when every animal was a potential messenger, and when the rustle in the dark forest could be something more than just the wind. It was a worldview that made life more precarious, but also charged it with a profound and mysterious sense of meaning.